But yeah, this is Olympians and Vampires: Talent, Practice, and Why Most of Us Don't Get It by Alessandra Buccella out of Argumenta. You're struggling? Ask away, Pink Lady. I mean, we'll find out what it is. You have to give it a bit. This is going to be on transformative experience. I don't know if you can read this small, but the idea is that you're going to change who you are, Retheus. And so this is going to be discussing something. How can you change who you are if you start off at one spot and then you go to the sequel to Cowboys and Aliens? Yes. Like, how do you actually change who you are? And that's what usually people are talking about when they're talking about vampires now. Philosophical vampires are some people who start off as human and then they end up as vampires. And how do you actually know what it is to be a vampire when you're human? Because you can't know what it is to be a vampire. So how do you change yourself in a very significant way? Frank says vampires were a lie made up by Big Garlic in 1897 to push more product. That is sadly very likely not far from the truth. Witches' hats were actually made a lot of, I heard many years ago, they were just marketing techniques by female brewers who were making beer. And so they would wear these big hats so that they could be seen at the market. And so, you know, the witch's brew was really beer, and they were getting people drunk. And so, but like they were using witch's hats as like a marketing technique. And so the idea that like Big Garlic might be going against them, it could easily have been rival brewers that did not like the women who were making alcohol. Oh, okay, you're making a joke, Pink Lady, no worries. So you work out, you practice, you get in the NBA. It's not so easy. Pink Lady says, are vampires real? The answer is yes. Rethia says you hate it. Okay, that's nice. You thought it might be a transformative experience paper. Yeah, I didn't know until I got like it open, but like I should have guessed by vampires. Thank you. I'm glad you like the background music. The music is from Ill-Advised Records. He makes spooky lo-fi. The abstract sounds outrageously egotistical in your opinion. Well, we'll find out. Wesleyan, yes. Vipers. I almost went to Wesleyan. Like actual vampires? Of course. You don't think there's actual vampires out there? Well, Wesleyan has, I don't know exactly what Vipers was saying, but Wesleyan has a sort of a reputation for being sort of hippy-dippy a little bit. So I should have gone to Wesleyan because there was this like super hot chick who was like, yo, all new students come here. I was like, I should have gone there and just dated that girl. She was so gorgeous. Maddie says there are like metaphorical vampires who are like energy vampires who just use and use and use. Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of joking. Like, do I actually think there are vampires that are immortal and suck non-vampire blood? No. But like, why not? It could be. Yeah, so yeah, Vipers is talking about their alumni. But yeah, okay, I'm gonna drop the music. Drop the music a little bit, and here we go. Yeah, and we'll find out if it's egotistical or not, but like this is, like I said, it's in Argumenta. Maybe it's terrible, we'll find out. Alright. What's worse, a vampire or a zombie? In terms of philosophical ones, I don't like philosophical zombies. It takes all the fun out of zombies. The vampires, I think, are at least a little bit more fun in terms of the philosophy that's talked about with them. In terms of like the like history in like non-philosophy, that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe vampires seem more fun, I guess, because like they get to wear cool clothes. Maddie says the irony of going Wesleyan is to date a hot chick, like inverted legally blonde. Yeah, like seriously, I would. That girl was so hot. And Phil says, I'm so confused now. Philosophical zombies. And there's a thing in philosophy of mind, like how do you know you're conscious? Could you actually be acting the way you are with no conscious experience and just be sort of like a computer on the inside? And that would be a philosophical zombie. Someone who acts and looks and speaks like they're conscious, but then has no experience, no actual conscious experience. And so it's a demonstration, like how do you know you're conscious? Well, you only have this experience, but what does that actually get you? And you don't know anyone else that does. Like, maybe you are conscious, maybe you're not, blah, blah, blah. It sucks all the fun out of being a zombie. Yeah, well, that's what is good about them in literature, because Viper says vampires and zombies are historically class metaphors. Yeah, but I'd just like to be the rich one as and have cool clothes like the vampires. Seems pretty silly, Rithia says. Like she says, there are differences between people who have talent and those who do not. I mean, there are people who have more talent than me in different areas. I'm good at some things. I mean, that's fair. There are differences between people, but we'll get there in a minute. Oh, you went to a wedding, Inferno? You definitely looked like you were having a great time. Oh, I gotta go check pictures. God damn it. Rethius says, I disagree. I'm ready to be challenged. I mean, are you a good ballroom dancer, Rethius? Are you ever going to be like a champion ballroom dancer? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. But like, there's going to be people who are better ballroom dancers than you. It's just the way things are. Pinkley says, maybe consciousness is a byproduct of evolution that maybe in 5 million years will disappear. I don't doubt you, Rethius. That's the thing, Pink Lady. It's like, is consciousness actually doing any work? And this is going into philosophy of mind, which we weren't doing right here, but like, that's okay. Philosophy of mind, like the philosophical zombie says, people don't actually have, or could people not actually have conscious experience and just be reacting without any like sort of mind going on? And like, how would you actually be able to tell the difference between someone who has no mind and someone who does have mind? And that's a really hard question, because all you see here is a little picture on the screen. I'm like looking at my the broadcast going out. Could you actually see anything like that? Could you tell that I'm actually conscious? All you have is like the words coming at you, so it's not so clear. Rethia says, I will ballroom dance the fuck out of your event for a healthy fee. Okay, there we go. Frank Big Time says height is a tremendous factor in basketball. Yeah, of course, that's not talent, that's sort of biological luck, but yeah. Valpo says weddings are fun. Hurrah for your friend. That is good. Vipers is countering that it wasn't in the future. Consciousness disappeared in 2016. And says, yeah, okay, we're just discussing good times at parties. There we go. Okay. So, here we go. Cecilia Zandalasini is a 24-year-old Italian basketball player. When you watch her take a jump shot, all you can think about is that she is doing exactly that. If God existed, her assigned mission on Earth would be. Yeah, so basically, and this is actually going back to something like, if you look at people that are high level in sports, like, it's sort of transcendent. A lot of people sort of say, all right, when you watch somebody that's just so good, you're just like in awe of these people. What is it like to be in awe of someone that good? And a lot of the discussion goes back to this sort of feeling that you're just sort of like in rapture, like enwrapped by people who are this good at sport, and you can just see it, and it's like fascinating. And I appreciate that you're all here not watching the American football playoffs. So yeah. Which are on right now, if you are a football enjoyer. Okay, Michaela Schifrin is a 25-year-old American alpine skier. Is she the one that just won all the gold medals? Yeah. Okay. When you watch her do a slalom run, you feel the way Sima Bu must have felt watching his student Giotto draw a perfect circle, free hand. These are only two examples of exceptional athletes about whom you can't help wondering. They most definitely have huge amount of talent, and surely they've been working extremely hard, but is this supposed to be enough to explain what they can accomplish on the court or on the snow? And this is always the question. How do you actually, when Michael Jordan showed up in professional basketball, it was, no one had seen that thing before. It just completely changed everything. And these are more contemporary examples. How are these people doing what they're doing if no one else has ever done this before? Author says, in this paper, I attempt to make sense of the relationship that there is, in the case of sports champions, between so-called talent, that is natural predispositions for particular physical activities and high-pressure competition, and practice training. Okay. In particular, I explore the possibility that our ordinary way to understand and relate such notions to each other is too simplistic and does not fully explain why certain people are so exceptionally good at sport. Okay, so this, to your point, Rethius, the author is arguing that, yeah, you might be good at stuff, but you're not as good as these people are, and there's a reason for that. So this author does not like you, Rethius. I'm sorry. You might not like them either. Author says they start by trying to articulate the folk conceptions of talent and practice. Then I argue that the folk conception does not have the right resources to capture the complex ways in which talent and practice combine and influence each other. Next, after I've examined a few other proposals, I present my own view rooted in the notion of continuous reward cycle. The continuous reward cycle articulates the dynamic interaction of talent and practice characteristic of exceptional athletes, thereby suggesting a possible explanation of why they feel so far away from us mere mortals. Yeah, so again, this is where the vampires are coming in. Because of the unique way in which talent and practice interact with the continuous reward cycle, I also argue that being a sports champion involves a radical transformation of one's entire practical way of being. As a consequence, it is part of my view that to fully understand what it is like to be an exceptional athlete, one must be such an athlete. Oh, I don't know what the heck. This is hacky as hell? Well, we'll find out. Most likely hacky as hell. Argumenta is like, we'll see. A lot of times this may promise a lot, but like sometimes these papers, they may get somewhere. Well, ask your question. Okay. Reading Rep says, will over-nominalization be the disestablishment of our society's pseudo-grammatical normalization of correct speech, intertransculturalism between semi-cultural, patriarchalist structures, and prefixal decommercialization? Does it normalize over-prefixation and nominalization of said pseudo-grammatical establishments, tearing down the nomenclature foundation of our transneural ideologies with its overcomplications of traditionalized semi-facial communications? I will leave that as homework for chat. You can all figure that one out. It's so easy. It should be obvious. Valpo says, damn, she had Brandon on her committee. Okay. So there we go. So this is maybe someone, like, again, you have to give people a chance here. That's kind of part of, like, philosophy roulette is sometimes people actually have a good argument. Viper says all she's doing is applying well-known video game design principles to real-life sport. So maybe then it's a good point. Yeah, hangovers and big words do not go together, and I completely agree. Like, I've definitely been drinking less since I've been reading philosophy roulette, or I've been in less hangover. I've done it less on hangovers. I actually try not to drink, get hungover on like days I have philosophy roulette. Reading Rap says, clearly we live in a society and the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. Yeah. Again, I leave that what Reading Rap said earlier was so obvious that it should just be trivial for everyone to do, to just understand. Yeah, I can't even believe I got through that paragraph so well. Okay. So, defining talent and practice. What does it mean to say that someone has talent in the context of a particular sport or game? So yeah, and this, I guess we could also relate this to video games. Thank you, Reading Rap. The folk conception of talent seems to involve at least two components, and it is common to understand them as being innate, or in other words, much more dependent on nature than nurture. The expression, that kid is a natural, speaks for itself. Yeah, so people just say people somehow just are good at sport because that's what they're good at, and somehow they're born that way. The first component is, of course, physical. One is born with certain bodily traits, height, fast reflexes, long limbs, very good coordination, and these traits combine in a way that is congenial to a certain sport or game. For example, basketball requires height and long arms. Those traits may not be ideal if one wants to excel in, for example, gymnastics. Yeah, and there's a shot of, what's her name? Oh, goddamn. Like the most winningest female gymnast of all time. She's probably about yay high. Like just I'm sitting. She's probably not a whole lot tired. Yeah, Simone Biles. Thank you, Frank. Standing next to like Shaquille O'Neal, and like she's teeny and he's huge, and it's like these are very different sports. Like they take different body types. Yeah, there was a guy, Muggsy Bogues, years ago, Reading Rap. Reading Rap says you can excel in basketball if you have a high vertical leap and are short. Muggsy Bogues was like 5'8" or 5'6" or something, and he was a quality basketball player in the NBA, and compared to all the other very tall people, and he had other skills that were sufficiently good to play basketball at a high level. So you can make up for it. It's not completely required to be tall, but it does help. The second component is psychological. One has the type of personality which handles pressure well, thrives in highly competitive contexts, quickly turn failure into motivation, and so forth. Frank Big Time says if you are short, by which I mean around 6 foot, you are competing against a million other 6-footers. If you're 7 foot, you are competing against a couple hundred other 7-footers. And Valpo liked Muggsy Bogues, yeah. Also, Simone Biles may be the greatest Texan. Yeah, entirely possible. I don't know all the Texans, though. Yeah, but that's the thing about sport. Like, that's the thing about everyone. If you are more average, like, physically or whatever required of you, you have to be on the outlier just to give yourself a bit of an advantage. But again, you can still be short, but you have to be that much more skilled or practice that much better for whatever it is. So it's like, you're entirely right, Frank. It's a question of like, what are the characteristics that matter the most? It's not always short or height or whatever. It might be other things too. Okay. Some might argue that this psychological component should not be considered innate and therefore intuitively not part of what talent usually means. Yeah, that might be the thing. Vipers hates the paper already just because we don't explain a multi-year self-reinforcing training strategy in our offhand comments doesn't mean that folk interpretation doesn't know that's part of it. It's the first 2 acts of every sports movie. Yeah, sure. But again, we're only on the like first full page of this paper, really, and so I'm gonna like, we might hate this, but like that doesn't mean it's going to have bad conclusions at the moment. We'll see. Like, I want to say the author has seen sports movies before. Yeah. Well, if you think of the reading wrap, if you think of the arc of a lot of like sports movies, it's like somebody with talent, but then they have like psychological problems and like they lose and they feel terrible, and then they break it down, and then like they start from the basics again, and then like they build it up, and then like they like have like the training montages where they're good, but like they don't have like they're not in the right headset, and then they learn to like really use their talents with the right sort of mindset, and then they overcome at the end. I mean, think about Rocky. It's just the sort of thing. Yeah, it's 80s training montage. What is that? And like, see, that's the whole thing. Like, Vipers had a very good point right there. Maddie says, even then, being something like left-handed or short can be an advantage because people aren't used to those variables, and they still have to be better despite it. Oh yeah, because like being a southpaw in boxing is always a thing. Like, oh, you have to like change all your strategies because the power punches are going to be coming from another side, and and if everyone you have to practice for righties because most people are righties, but then again, like if they're a lefty in tennis or a lefty in boxing, it's going to really throw off where you think the power punches or power strokes are going to come from. So Frank says, I think there's room for a whole other variable too. Access to training by a trainer who really knows how to train. That's neither talent nor hard work. Of course, no. You need to have proper training, which is then dependent on situation, like money or friends or like just the government. It's like that'll be context dependent. But yeah, I think they're not worried about that right here. If you and like your twin, one of you is like good at sports and the other one isn't, it's like you're coming from the same environment. Maddie says they're lefty. Right-handed people don't know how to fence against you, but have me fence against other lefties, and we were basically Gumby fighting. Yeah, and that's the thing. So yeah, if you're doing fencing, again, like you're going to be having trouble because you're used to certain moves that will work, because like you have to strike certain places on the body, and if they're lefty and you're used to striking from the right side, you're not hitting the same spots, so it's going to be different. That makes sense. Actually, I haven't thought about fencing in a while. Actually, I walked by a fencing place in New York City the other day, and I was like looking, I was like, oh, a fencing place, interesting. So my name is Maddie Holmes. You killed my father. Prepare to die. Okay, so yeah, so the psychological component should not be considered innate, and therefore intuitively not part of what talent usually means. I mean, this is going to be yes and no. I'm sure the author knows this. For instance, a lot of top athletes turn to sports psychologists or motivational coaches. These professionals teach them various techniques to handle issues like pressure from the media, performance anxiety, recovery after injuries, etc. This seems to suggest that the mental strength of sports champions is in fact something that can be learned, and which therefore should be listed as part of what practice and training consist in, rather than the so-called natural talent. Yeah. Yeah, yes. That you don't like people. You hear all these stories about like people's parents who've given up jobs so that their kid can train all day or whatever. Like they move so that the kid can be near a gym that trains better. Yeah. For example, Matthew Syed argues that what he calls the growth mindset, that is, the psychological capacity to see the obstacles on the path of excellence not as failures but as signs of constant improvement and sources of motivation to work even harder, is in fact learned and trainable, and has nothing to do with innate talent. Quote, she, the figure skating gold medalist Shizuki Arakawa from 2006, interpreted falling down not merely as a means of improving, but as evidence that she was improving. Failure was not something that sapped her energy and vitality, but something that provided her with an opportunity to learn, develop, and adapt. Yeah, it's the old, it's not how many times you fall down, but that you get up. Myths can make life suck hard too. Look at any of Dan Dent's ideas to die for. Yeah, I mean, the psychology and the ideas in your philosophy even can really affect how you your outlook and how you deal with things in the world. And there are, of course, like a lot of Stoic philosophy is very popular now because things suck. Stoic philosophy says you only need to get your head right and you'll be better off. And I can see a lot of people trying to basically use Cynic philosophy as a self-help and a self-improvement program to deal with the bullshit that exists out there nowadays. If like I think things were better off in the world, Cynic philosophy would be. I mean, Stoic philosophy would not have its current popularity. All right, Syed thinks that Arakawa and sports champions in general achieved their remarkable success thanks to their ability to mentally push themselves beyond their physical limits and to look at mistakes in a positive light. Yeah, Vipers meditate against the machine, absolutely, and that's one of mine, and I'm sure you've heard Aris criticize them that they're basically they're Stoics are towing the line, the status quo here. And so it's like they're meditating and like the machine just grinds on. They're like, oh, well, it doesn't affect me. It's like, well, yeah, but you've done nothing. You're not even angry about it anymore. You feel like you're okay. But like that's playing into the status quo. And Farrell says myths are basically petty sounding BS to make people do things that society wants. Yeah. What myths are being pushed? That's exactly it. It's like, so yeah. So it's like, what myths are you going to take on? And the author here is claiming that sports athletes at the highest level have to, develop these sorts of ideas for themselves or have it, taught to them with like sports psychology. Okay, Vipers, let's take a look when you get it. These abilities, according to Syed, are paradigmatically not part of the folk notion of innate talent. Syed's view seems consistent with the conception of training as a challenge, as necessarily hard and full of failures, which one can then learn to find intrinsic value in. This idea was central to the Stoic doctrine and approach to life, for instance. Yeah, so this is the thing. It's like this is the contemporary stuff, like the Stoics. Quote, effort played a central role in Stoic ascetics, and they did not regard it as a negative thing to be avoided. Effort and struggle can be meaningful and even intrinsic goods. In Foucault's analysis, this was an important educative aspect of Stoic ascetics, where tests, misfortunes, suffering, and difficulties should not be considered as evils but as goods. See, and this is not part of the paper, but the idea that suffering and difficulties should not be considered as evils but as goods, that's way too simplistic. Of course, suffering and difficulties suck, and they are quite often evils, but some like effort needs to be expended. That's right. Let's see what we got here from Vipers. There we go. So, as a therapist, I can say confidently that while therapy is helpful, what most people really need is money. And that's fair. Like, things suck, and it's not all just, like, in your head. And so the idea that evils is, like, difficulties and evils should not be considered as evil, but as goods. No. Sometimes people need the world to suck less and should be angry about that. And that's one of my beefs with Stoic stuff, but that's separate from this paper. The whole point is that, like, if you are trying to do something fancy in sports, you will have to suffer the training, and the training is a good. So, okay. Frank says men will just spend dozens of hours per week working to earn money instead of going to therapy. Yeah, people won't do what they actually need to do. That's fair. But like, sometimes people just need money because the rest of their life would be okay if they just had money. And related, let's see what we've got from Pink Lady. So, yeah, unfortunately, I'm not logged in over here. But medical care alone won't help the spread of diabetes. Yeah, this is the problem. It's, the things that, it's going to be a lifestyle change, but if we're killing ourselves at work, then, yeah, it's okay. I can't read it right now, Pink Lady, so don't worry. We got, like, you can tell that it's not just a question of, like, fixing the problem after the fact. You need to change people's lives, get them better food, get them better like resources, so that they're not stressed out, so that they can eat better, so that they don't get these diseases that screw with your life in a bad way. And diabetes is really, 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 really bad for you, like really bad for you. And so the idea that like we're reacting to it after the fact and trying to like cure it, like manage it, is like terrible, because it's a bad disease and it's hard to deal with. Okay. So the author says, Russell makes a similar point about the human virtue of resilience and the fact that failure, defeat, and all the difficult situations an athlete has to overcome are constitutive of the nature of sport itself. Quote, the challenges that sport presents are only interesting if they represent tests that are and continue to be meaningful. That is, the challenges are designed precisely because they are and will remain difficult to master. If I am right about this, sport is founded and draws fundamentally on the need for resilience. To be meaningful, indeed to be sport, the obstacles or challenges must be such that failures and setbacks are to be anticipated and can never be completely avoided. Sport requires that they be embraced for the opportunity to respond to and overcome them. Sport exists fundamentally, if not exclusively, as an arena of testing resilience. It is key to sport. There is no sport without the meaningful prospect of adversity, and so sportsmen and women must be prepared to cultivate resilience and express it at nearly every turn. Let's see. Copy. Okay, so what do we got? So here's a thing from the Times. Researchers who study type 2 diabetes have reached a stark conclusion. There is no device or drug powerful enough to counter the effects of poverty, pollution, stress, a broken food system, cities that aren't walkable, and inequitable access to healthcare. Yeah, and there's the thing. Treating diabetes after the fact is not going to be a good treatment for diabetes. Yeah. Thank you, Vipers, for go to archive.is and put in the URL and hit the search box. That usually gets you a version of it. Okay. However, does the fact that character can be built through effort, setbacks, and difficulties contradict the idea that it should be considered a natural trait? And remember, as was said in the movie Dodgeball does not build character, it reveals character. And so the movie Dodgeball, if you take that as fact, which you should, then Dodgeball actually says that resilience is not a something you can learn. Even according to this paper, it seems to be a thing, but like Dodgeball says, no, it reveals character, it does not build character. For those of you who know the movie Dodgeball, that is. Okay, there are cases in which resilience or other virtues that play a role in the growth mindset seem to be present in people from very early on and in contexts unrelated to sports, while every other aspect of their athletic excellence emerges much later. This is the case of many great athletes who, despite lacking many of the material, financial, social, etc. conditions that one usually associates with excellence and success, manage to overcome obstacles, defeat the odds, and claw their way to the big stage, all thanks to the tremendous willpower and focus. And so this is basically just quoting Rocky here, like the Rocky movie. This is the Rocky mythology, that he had none of the breaks in life, he had all the problems, and basically through being resilient enough and getting one lucky break, he was able to then fix all of his problems. and become world champ eventually. Not in the first movie though. Second movie. Another category of athletes may or may not have had obstacles to overcome early in life due to their socioeconomic situation, but nonetheless managed to succeed and excel mostly thanks to outstanding dedication and hard work. These are the so-called late bloomers who went through early frustrations and doubts about whether they really had what it takes, but trained so hard and were willing to take so many sacrifices to get to the top that they literally changed their body and improved their skill through disciplined, excruciating work. They did not give up. They believed that they could make it, and then they did. Exactly. That's Rocky. And damn it, nerds bypassing paywalls. I know. We're rebels in our own little, very sad way sometimes. As these examples suggest, the growth mindset and more generally the psychological traits and dispositions. You know what? I can zoom in on this a bit. Do 250. Yeah. As these examples suggest, the growth mindset and more generally the psychological traits and dispositions that one quite reliably finds in sports champions do not fit perfectly either in the innate category or in the acquired one. And to complicate things even more, cases like that of late bloomers shed some doubt on physical traits and their innateness too. Sometimes late bloomers simply took a bit longer to develop, perhaps through a sudden or unanticipated growth spurt over a couple months, but such development was clearly already written in their genes. But some other times, a late bloomer, or perhaps more appropriately, an improbable bloomer, is someone who, even lacking the physical traits that would normally favor one in a certain sport, for example, height in basketball, worked on acquiring and improving some other physical trait that, once developed enough, compensated for the rest. This is the case, for instance, of someone like Muggsy Bogues, again. So this person's really hitting all of our examples today. They hit the Stoics, I said, Muggsy Bogues. This is kind of funny. Who managed to be inducted into the Basketball Hall of Fame after 14 years in the NBA, despite only being 160 centimeters tall. I think he's like 5'6". So like he's short by any basketball standard. Not even like on the low side. He's on the not even tall by. He's like below average, I think, for men in the United States. And having very small hands. So that means you can't palm the ball. So you have a advantage if you can hold a basketball just in one hand. So I can palm my glass of water, but a basketball is so, so if you can just hold, if you have a big enough hand to just hold a basketball in one hand, that is an advantage. Nerds with sex appeal, damn right, Pink Lady. To compensate for that, he worked on his legs until he could jump about 2/3 of his height, and on dribbling so close to the ground that virtually nobody else could reach the ball, while at the same time maintaining control thanks to quick wrist movements and strong arm muscles. Yeah, so he went underneath everybody else is what they're saying here. That's kind of funny. Frank says, I can hold a basketball, but I can't jerk my hand around and maintain my hold. Yeah, so these guys in basketball, you can see them. They can fake throw, they can do that and just hold on to the ball because they're just massive people. And so it's they can do that. And so if you can fool somebody that you're going to throw the ball in one hand, that is an advantage. So it's and you just can't do that with if you have smaller hands. Or just not even smaller hands, just not massive hands. The other big aspect of what champions are made of is exhausting, brutal, never-ending training. In other words, the dirty hard work called practice. Practice is what a top athlete's life is mostly made of. Whenever she is not competing, she is practicing. Practice might include physical activities that are quite far off from the sport or game she is practicing for. For example, swimmers do a lot of weightlifting, alpine skiers often ride their bikes during the summer, etc. But every activity done in the context of practice has its ultimate goal of the improvement of the athlete's performance in her preferred sport. Thus, we could think of practice as a category that includes all the activities, physical or intellectual. Even video analysis sessions are practice, which have the improvement of performance in agonistic settings, races, matches, etc. as their goal both individually and collectively. Let us turn now to the folk conception of the relationship between talent and practice. Okay, the additive model of folk sport theory. In the ordinary way of speaking, talent and practice are conceived as two factors that can be summed up so that T plus P, so that T plus P equals C. So the talent plus the practice equals the champion. The higher the sum, the greater the champion. I will call this the additive model. That is a model in which practice is simply an addition to the talent, and the two notions are separate and logically independent from one another. This in turn means that ceteris paribus, if two people practicing the same sport have the same amount of talent, who is better depends on how hard each of them practices. Vice versa, if two people practice in the exact same way for the exact same amount of time, the difference in success as athletes would be exclusively dependent on how much talent they were born with. Okay, Frank says, I would say the folk understanding is multiplicative instead of additive. So talent times practice is how good the champion is. You know what's interesting? I don't think it's going to make a big difference in this thing. Like, if you change the plus to a multiplication, I don't know if it's actually going to make a huge difference. Because the most important things I suspect here is that the talent and the practice are independent. And so they can vary independent of each other. It's not like the practice is going to be dependent on the kind of talents they have. It's just you practice, and the talent stays what it is. They don't affect each other. But I don't know yet, but I think it's actually, you might be right, but I don't think it's going to matter here. Okay, leaving aside once again the material circumstances that might affect people's success as athletes, such as bad luck with injuries, growing up in a part of the world that's peripheral to professional sports, not being able to dedicate as much time to training because of other family needs, etc., the additive model seems prima facie straightforward. In fact, it seems to genuinely capture the way we intuitively think about the differences both between top athletes and between a top athlete and an average sport amateur. Without too much reflection, if we attributed the same amount of talent to two athletes in the same discipline, we would probably identify as the reason why one is more successful than the other, the fact that the former practiced more or better than the latter. I mean, yeah, if you're just saying it's not luck, then what did the two people who have what you thought were the same talent, what did they do? One must have worked harder. Yeah, and that would just be more practice. Okay, regarding the comparison between a champion and an ordinary person, then it seems fairly uncontroversial that, even if the two practiced in the same way for the same amount of time, the former would still be better than the latter, and this would be because of the different amounts of talents possessed. Under the unlikely assumption that Cecilia Zandalicini and I practiced in the same way for the same number of hours every day for all of our lives, the fact that I am not a basketball star while Zandalicini seems to be explained largely by the fact that she has much more talent, physical, mental, or both. However, a corollary of the additive conception is that if I practice more, harder, paying attention not to take up bad habits, I would be able to compensate for my lack of talent. This seems to be how folk sport theory understands the dynamics involved in becoming a sports champion, which includes the romantic idea that anyone can do it as long as they want it enough. What does that mean? Your coach sucked the paper. Okay, so you're just saying that, like, you're blaming, this person is blaming the coach. Yeah, I agree. But that's what they're saying here, is that basically in this area of the paper, they're saying this is the idea, right, in this whole thing. It's that if you didn't get the right kind of practice in and it was your coach, then, like, yeah, you could blame, like, the practice you got. Makes sense. Viper says, from her.com, I like to read and learn about user experience design, machine learning, and human-computer interaction. I love playing sports, especially basketball, and I am a volunteer youth basketball coach. I think I'm correct in her applying game design principles to her secondary interest. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, they're definitely doing this sort of that kind of analysis. So, but like I said, you guys were hating on this at the get-go, but, like, I'm suspecting that you might like it the farther on we're getting, because if this person is doing machine learning and computer human interaction, they probably are dealing with some of the things that you are thinking about, Vipers, and maybe they're going to say something not as crazy as you might have started off thinking. Vipers is a cynic. Yeah, I am not entirely surprised you'd say that, because Vipers is pretty cynical. Yeah, so again, this was this is the author's description of one idea of folk understanding. That is just like the everyday understanding of the relationship between talent and practice. Frank says, I don't think she's saying anything bad, just not anything new, but she's still working up to her point. Exactly. This is all precursor to the author making their point. Okay. However, and here's where the additive model shows its most obvious shortcomings. Talent and practice do not run on parallel tracks and should not be considered two separate blocks that can be summed up summed and linearly combined. Quite on the contrary, talent and practice, the way I've defined them earlier, are in many ways interdependent. The way in which natural body features or personality traits combine with training is complex and nuanced. For starters, it is simply not the case that two people could ever train in the same exact way, precisely because training involves bodies, and bodies are all different and change over time, partially as an effect of training itself. What I do and what Zandalicini does, exercises in the weight room, ball handling and shooting drills, etc., might look the same from the outside, but what actually goes on in my case and in hers is very different, both in the present and in relation to the future. Secondly, talent in the way we have defined it affects training and practice effectiveness directly as well as indirectly. Viper says, members of the opposite sex seem to automatically assume I'm a cynic. When they look at me, they go, woof. Yes. But I mean, you can't assume that Pink Lady is actually female just because their handle is lady. That does not mean that they are opposite from you in gender. I don't know, but you may have been just making a general statement. I assume Pink Lady might be gender, but like that doesn't mean they are. But you may not be responding exactly to Pink Lady. So I'm sorry if I've gotten any of that wrong. Want about members, yeah. Oh, so it was mostly in general. So I think we can just assume Viper's a dog just generally. That's all. So I'm sure Viper's meant no bad assumption there. Anywho, views that tried to go beyond the additive model and that acknowledged that talent and practice influenced each other have been proposed before. Oh, that's right. It is a kind of apple. I forgot about the apple. Okay, so they identify as a fruit. For example, David Epstein, Data at Hand, presents an idea for which he calls the talent of trainability. Epstein presents empirical evidence for two claims. The first is that even though it is possible to identify an average number of hours of practice one needs to train to excel in a certain skill, maybe this be playing golf, chess, or the violin, the range of variation among individual learners is dramatically wide. For example, if one individual needs around 3,000 hours of practice to become a chess master, another individual could only reach the same level in over 25,000 hours. And infernal, like me, because of my name, you can't assume that's my name, and or that I'm infernal. It's a lie in reality. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe you are a demon spawn, Dan. We have not yet investigated. But that's true. I cannot tell that from your name, which is fair. Certain natural traits seem to make it the case that certain people's practice is more effective more quickly. And this is the thing. This is really the thing. The training is going to be, and the practice, they're going to be interrelated. Not the training, the talent and the practice. They're going to be related to each other. How the practice affects your talent is going to matter. So, this second claim, connected to but highly different from the first one, is that presumably somewhat innate capacity to improve fast affects the motivation to train more and more efficiently. Yeah, and that's fair. And so, again, how your body reacts to training is going to affect your psychology. Viper says, speaking of ladies, I got Lionel Richie's 3 times the lady stuck in my head today, and I started wondering what that meant. Then I was like, oh, nice. No wonder he misses her. And Valpa says, nah, and is ironically angelic. Sounds right. Okay. In particular, Epstein describes a study in which young male Japanese runners have been followed during their early years of training from age 14 to 21. The study measured the increase of aerobic capacity, that is, the amount of oxygen used by the body during physical activity during 7 years of training, with all the boys starting off at an almost identical level. I can't think of 3 times the lady now. I'm kind of annoyed. I can't think of that off the top of my head. But, I can guess. Oh well. And this is a quote from Epstein. Over the course of their years of training, the boys all improved, but naturally divided into 2 groups. Study Group 1, which saw an average aerobic capacity increase of 13%, and Study Group 2, with boys who hit a plateau of 9% of aerobic improvement, as well as a plateau of race time improvement by age 17. Each of the boys in the latter group, having ceased to improve, quit running altogether after age 17. That is not to say that the boys who continued competing were just lucky. The study suggests that the more potential to improve the boys had, the longer and harder they had to work to reach it. But the ability to improve may have kept them in the sport and dedicated to training. Yeah, so if you see that you're getting better, you may put more time and effort in. Hence why you chose it as your prawn name, ha ha ha, and that is the truth. Ah, dear. Yeah, it's like, feel free to drop your socials in chat, Ann. I don't mind. Actually, true, why have I not shouted everyone out? I'm like bad streamer. First of all, we should shout out Ann, because we're talking with Ann. Everyone should go follow Ann and check out all her socials. And yeah, because Ann is lovely and smart and wonderful. And also makes money off the internet, which is more than I can say for what I do here. I'd like to, I thank you, Acule, and everyone else who supports me through this, but it's like I don't expect to get paid any amount of money from philosophy. So, but yeah. At least Ann makes more money than me, which I can be happy about. Okie doke. Let's see, what was it? Yeah, Epstein's view still takes something like the folk conception of talent and shows how it has an effect on practice. It makes improvement faster and thereby boosting motivation to train more, thus improving even more, etc. But what about the effects that practice has on talent? Can we make sense of such an idea? And can a theory accommodate both the fact that talent affects practice and that practice affects talent? I mean, you should be able to, because there's going to be people who have talents that have not been apparent in the sport that they can be used. So just off the top of my head, I'm just like, look, if someone is like just so much faster than everyone else in the sport, maybe you can figure out how to practice in a way that makes the speed make a difference that everyone else didn't realize that speed made a difference. I'm thinking like something like tennis. There were many years ago a guy named David Chang. David Chang was a top level tennis player, and he could run down balls that like other people could not run down, and therefore would continue points. His defense was excellent, and therefore could like get to things. And by developing his speed, he was able to use strategies that other people could not. So it affected his talent because the idea of what it was to be talented at tennis changed because of what he was able to do. So, okay, one possibility is that we understand talent as a person's disposition that only manifests itself through practice, similarly to fragility being a disposition of material objects that manifests itself only in certain circumstances. Like, yeah, you only know something's fragile because it can break on when you hit it with something hard. On this view, practice influences talent by being sort of an enabler, that is, what creates the conditions in which talent can manifest itself as an externally recognizable property of an individual. Let's explore this idea in more detail. So, hey, we're getting just metaphysics of properties and at the moment. What does it mean to say that talent is a disposition or a dispositional property possessed by a person? In more standard cases of dispositional properties like fragility, the notion is usually explained in counterfactual terms. An object is fragile, that is, that has the dispositional property of fragility. If we were to put in a condition of even minimal mechanical stress, it would break. Yeah. She just cribbed that from Dodgeball. Dodgeball is a fantastic movie, and everyone should watch it. And I suggest I saw once on like one of the channels, it was the director's cut, which has even raunchier jokes. So you should see the director's cut of Dodgeball if you can handle it. It's funny. Yeah, objects like the crystal glasses are fragile, and they remain fragile for the entire life of the entire length of their existence, whether or not this fragility gets to manifest itself. An unbroken crystal glass has the dispositional property of fragility, that is, the disposition to break under the appropriate circumstances. A broken crystal glass not only has the dispositional property of fragility, but it also instantiates the manifestation of such a property. The glass underwent mechanical stress and broke. Is there a way to build an analogy between the case of fragile crystal glass and that of the talented athlete? We could say that a person has the dispositional property of talent with respect to a certain sport or activity. If were the person to actually play that sport or to engage in that activity, they would be good at it in a way that suggests some innate instinct or predisposition for the activity. But this seems circular. Talent is being defined in terms of talent itself. Someone is talented if they were to engage in practice, they would manifest their talent. The problem, as I see it, lies in the conceptual asymmetry between fragility and its designated effect, that is, breaking, and talent and the absence of a designated effect specifiable in non-question begging terms. So that's interesting. Like, this is the sort of an interesting thing. You can't say like talent is just innate because it means that you have talent once you practice, because you're just defining it. Well, they had talent, and then therefore they have it after they practice. You can see it, but like that doesn't tell you what they've done. Doesn't mean that they had it. You have to specify, well, can they jump very high? Maybe they have talent, but once they're trained, they can jump very high. But that's not question begging. But talent on its own is too abstract. Okay. A glass's fragility manifests itself in the form of breaking when the glass hits the floor. If we had to preserve the analogy, we would have to say that a person's talent manifests itself when the person practices, but in the form of what exactly does it manifest itself? So I mean, I was like, when you jump high for like basketball. While fragility and breaking are clearly two distinct concepts, it is not clear that talent and the form in which talent manifests itself are. Yeah, like just being able to jump high is not inherent to being good at basketball. Talent seems to be identical with its manifestations because talent is a specific way in which a person relates to their practice. On the other hand, fragility is not a specific way in which a glass relates to, say, the floor. Could it be the case that practice is the disposition that manifests itself thanks to talent? This option, though prima facie odd, fits with the idea that talent is a specific way in which a person relates to her practice, which in turn can be read as talent consisting in a series of conditions which, when met, make practice look a certain way and have certain effects. Seeing talent as the enabler rather than the disposition seems to make sense when combined with the idea that what talent enables are specific forms practice takes which lead to specific results. So talent means that practice works for you. It makes you better somehow. So that's interesting. Okay, but what would the disposition manifested this way be? Recall that fragile glass as example. Pressure or mechanical stress enables the dispositional property of fragility to manifest itself in the form of breaking. Parallel, talent enables the dispositional property of something to manifest itself in the form of, say, efficient, effective, and success-bringing practice. But putting practice in the spot where the something is does not seem to make sense. Is practice the tendency to practice effectively when talented? Quite clearly not. Viper says, I know someone who wanted a swimmer's body. He trained and could never quite achieve it. Then it occurred to him that the people with that type of body became professional swimmers. People can't get that body from swimming. Yeah, there's definitely a genetic thing to having the right kind of body to do it. Now, you could, change your body in a certain amount of way, but you're never going to be like someone who is disposed to having that sort of body. You can see this also in the Olympics, and why certain countries are always very good at certain sports is you can see that they're physically similar to each other. It's like people from like these like backgrounds have bodies that do this. Now, I'm not saying like, one country is inherently better than another. It's just saying that these sports are, a lot of times developed in those regions of the world because those people are good at that stuff. So it's like, yes, are you going to you can have a Jamaican bobsled team, but like you're going to find that the majority of people that like work on these sorts of sports are going to be from alpine countries because, these are the people who can do this sort of thing. Well, Frank, yes. So in the paper's phrasing, talented swimmers are people whose bodies will turn to swimmers' bodies when they practice. But again, this is still lead up. They're still developing the idea. But at the moment, that's the point. That's the point the author is making, that it doesn't actually make sense to think of talent in this way because it is circular. It's like people with swimmers' bodies are just the people who, have swimmers' body when they practice. But that doesn't explain anything because it's too circular. So yeah, and we're getting to that right now with right here. What seems to be missing is a notion that can reasonably take the place of the X in the definition above. Like, what is it that is being developed? And this is not easy to find. It's not just the property of having a swimmer's body that makes you a swimmer. It needs to be something else. And they're saying not so easy to define here. So, However, we might have already encountered a candidate earlier on. Epstein's talent of trainability idea states that talent should be understood as what allows an athlete to get the most out of practice, where effective practice is itself a manifestation of such talent. Combining the dispositional view with Epstein's notion seems to get us closer to a good account. The folk conception of talent remains in the role of enabler. Practice maintains its role of manifestation of a disposition, and Epstein's trainability idea becomes the disposition, that is, the X we're looking for. Even though this seems to work, I cannot help but seeing it as somewhat redundant. If trainability is itself a dimension of talent, then it is trivial to say that talent enables talent to manifest itself. Can we come up with something better? I think so, and we are almost there. Yeah, this was all set up to get to what they wanted to get to, which is right over here. Let's finish this paragraph up, and then we'll get to the actual thing of what the author is saying here. Perhaps talent and practice stand in a potentiality-actuality relation. Okay, we're going Aristotelian here, and I bet some people in chat are happy. Potentiality-actuality relation, that is, talent is in potentiality what practice is in actuality, and both are ways in which certain power exists and manifests itself. If such a power could be defined, then we might have something that can take the place of the X above while avoiding the redundancy. This power in the vicinity of Epstein's trainability idea would exist as a potentiality, which we usually call talent, as an actuality, which we call practice. This is indeed what I will present next as my favorite proposal. Okay, and we've gone Aristotelian here, and we've got a powers argument, which you don't see that much, which I kind of like. I like powers arguments. They're not them say they're good arguments, but you don't see them that much. That's why I like them. So they're saying you have an innate power, and training allows you to exercise your power. This is not circular. This is good metaphysics. Well, this is better metaphysics out of Aristotle. So it's you don't have a swimmer's body, but you have the power to attain a swimmer's body through diligent practice, Frank, is what the author is going to say here. Okay, in the previous section, I argued that the additive model does not have the resources to describe the complex and dynamic ways in which notions like talent and practice interact with each other and within each individual. Then I took a brief detour into a better alternative, that is, a version of dispositionalism, which, however, still falls short of capturing the relationship between talent and practice in a satisfactory way. Lastly, I conceded that seeing talent and practice as two moments of a more complex power might be the right way to go. The view I favor, which I present in this section, takes this idea as a starting point and elaborates on how the dynamic interaction between talent and practice for very few elite individuals can result in a radical transformation and in a reshaping of the whole practical way of being. On this view, talent and practice dynamic interaction unfolds in what I call the continuous reward cycle. Okay, so this person just did a little recap right here, which is interesting. They want to finish up with all the crap from before, which was everyone else's ideas that they just went through and were like, those don't work, they don't make sense, and here's what I'm going to do, and this is why it didn't work, and this was it. So this is actually interesting, putting the sort of the recap right before their section. And we're most of the way through this paper, by the way. Why is the find open here? That doesn't need to be there. So this is just interesting. We're on page 8 of 11. Let's just see right here. We only got another few pages of this. Yeah, so we only get to really to page 10. We're on page 8 right now. So it's interesting just in terms of structure. If you're out there reading, thinking about structures of papers, I think this is actually pretty nicely structured. Remember, they started off with examples, then they went into a little bit of the background theory of what other people would make of those examples, and then they knocked those down. But the fact that they started with examples like Muggsy Bogues, with the Stoic philosophy stuff, that there's ways to think about this, the psychology and the practice and stuff, I kind of like the way this granted, I like this is why I like argumenta. The arguments here are I like arguments, so I like the structure of how this person went about this argument. And again, do I think this is do I agree with this stuff? You're going into a powers argument. I know the metaphysics of powers arguments, they have their benefits and not, but it's just if you're thinking about how to organize papers, this one is well organized for what they're trying to do. Okay, we're going to get a cycle here. The cycle consists in the following. At some usually early stage of learning and practice, a certain athletic discipline, something about one's nature, that is, many of the features that we include in the folk notion of talent, will start interacting with the stimuli coming from the outside, that is, practice, so that the athlete will experience a particularly striking harmony between her agential capacities and the activities she is engaging in. The athlete sees herself improving fast, and this importantly boosts her confidence in that she is on the right track and keeps her motivation to keep working. Positive feedback from the outside, first personal evidence that one is getting better and better, and the aesthetically pleasant experience of your actions harmoniously fitting your abilities are extremely valuable rewards when one practices hard. Viper says the reason Terraria is a success is because it gives you a constant feeling of mastery. You're constantly figuring things out, and each revelation opens up more possibilities and more things to figure out. This is the continuous reward cycle she's applying to sports training. Yeah. And this is like, people at the slot machines. You get your little boost of rewards every so often, and this is a mathematical thing, and this is big in the video game industry. It's big in advertising, and so this is basically saying that this is inherently built in to the way people learn how to get into sports, and so that's the application here. Now, question for you, Vipers: do you still hate this paper? That she has now integrated this sort of have you ever heard people that like to work out all the time? They find it like they treat it kind of like they get feedback, like they're getting the dopamine boost out of doing what they do. And so it is a little bit like an addiction, but in this case it's a very positive one. So yeah, no. And that is what the argument is here. She's calling them vampires, which are biological freaks. Yeah, that is exactly where this argument's going. You've nailed it. We're going to the vampire theory right now. We're on the way. They're not even human anymore, basically. Is the brain's dopamine that's all these things? Yeah, is the cause. Yeah, but that's exactly where we're going. They're training themselves to be getting that constant hit, and yeah, and that's where we're going. That's the vampire aspect, which we're going to hit probably in the next page. Viper still hates it. As noted earlier, she's saying nothing new in as in many worlds as possible. Okay, so you just think it's trivial, but fair. You already knew this stuff then, which is okay. Paper's not for you. It happens, but then you can at least say it's trivial, but it's good in terms of if this didn't exist already, then it should at least exist, so that you have something to reference. Yeah. Frank Big Time says, being good at a thing makes you value being good at that thing, which leads you to practice that thing, which is recursion all the way down. Yeah, and that's part of her point here. But she's also making the next level claim that there's a feedback loop that is interacting between good at it and how you practice it. And so it's more complicated than just the psychological aspect. Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, Vipers. When you think something's trivial, it's because you already know what's happening. And you don't like it because you're like, well, I'm bored then, which is fine. Oh, Valpa, you didn't know about the slot machine thing? No, that's exactly why video games are structured the way they are. Loot boxes in video gaming, it's part of the biggest problem with them, is that they're doing the same thing here to make them give you the feedback every so often in slot machines and other stuff. That's a whole sort of the psychology behind designing games for gambling. If you're one of these high-level athletes, it works like slot machines and you're your own loot box. Yeah, and so that's what winning the championship is like. You get these wins every so often in practice and against others. And so that's why you need good competition, so you can always get a better score. But that's basically, I think, where she's going. But this is why Vipers is annoyed, because Vipers already knows this stuff from game design and computers. So it's it seems old hat to Vipers, but applying this to the learning of how sports get developed in athletes is I haven't seen that before. All you're saying is that you could explain in 1 or 2 chat messages. You don't need 11 pages. You hate the verbosity. You could explain it to somebody who has a similar background to you in a few chat messages. You don't need 11 pages. this is wider than your stuff. Like you couldn't, like, I mean, not to hate on you, but like you're not going to be able to put one of these dispositional bullshit arguments that other philosophers make, because why would you do that? Like, who's going to actually do that? Do you know the metaphysics of breaking glass stuff? Like the target audience here does not know the things you know. And so it's like, yeah, that's fair, Vipers, but I think you have more background than a lot of people in this area. So that's why it seems a little easier to you, but I think there's other people out there that do not have the same background. So this is the thing. She's using examples that are from different areas, which is fair. But you already know the structure of what's happening from one area, but like other people will know the other things, and so she's combining the ideas. And says, papers make you say all these things. Sometimes you can't even publish without talking for whole chapters about theoretical frameworks to the point of exhaustion. Sometimes it's so lame. Yeah, and that's the other part. Thank you, Anne, for bringing that up. Is that when you are going to be publishing academic philosophy, you have to take into account a bunch of different positions in the literature, and that's just what it is to publish academic philosophy. In any philosophy journal, you have to, at least do some background talking. And so, yeah, you could explain it, but that doesn't mean it's going to get published. You could explain it quickly, but it won't get published. You have to do the background work to show that you at least have considered the things, even if you disagree with them. Okay. Where was I? Okay. Yeah, and to Valpo, here she says, and short-term tangible rewards are crucial to sustain motivation, especially given that practicing hard takes time, energy, puts strain on personal relationships, requires travel, and in many cases a substantial monetary investment either by the athlete herself or her family or by third parties, like a school or foundation. Yeah, and so there's the thing. You're getting the feedback, but you have to keep putting quarters in the machine too. Okay, and even on that point, there's opportunity costs. So it's not just putting quarters in the machine. It's like you're spending so much time you're not doing other things. So, okay, external positive feedback and first personally experienced harmony of capacity are the fuel that keeps the continuous reward cycle going. The athlete motivated by the experience of harmony. Whatever that means. This is just some sort of reward. It doesn't matter what they're calling experience of harmony. That's nonsense. Motivated by the dopamine or the experience of harmony, which is both aesthetically pleasant and practically rewarding, engages in practice in a more and more immersive way, which ends up being transformative. Viper says, maybe I should write a short paper, not about wasting the precious time I have on Earth for the sake of perceived rigor. Yeah. Yeah, sure, you do that and try to get published, Vipers. Good luck. Frank says, I wonder how long it will take before continually putting quarters in the machine just won't make any sense to people anymore. Well, quitting, and you see, Frank, why people play sports past their prime. It's all they know how to do. This is all they've been doing. They put the work in, but they're not getting the same rewards out. And, you see these, older athletes, and sometimes, they're no good anymore, and what are they doing? And that's a real hard question. And you see people, they don't want to give up their dream of becoming a professional sports athlete, even when they're not good enough. So, that's real tough. Okay. Indeed, the author suggests that once the continuous reward cycle is in motion, practice's role in an athlete's overall understanding of her own agency changes, and from merely an activity the athlete engages in, it becomes the primary expression and fundamental interpretive key of the athlete's agency, the core of her practice, way of being in the world. Maintaining a continuous reward cycle active over time unlocks new ways of practicing, as well as new ways in which one's body is affected by such practice that would not be as beneficial or even available separate from the dynamics of the cycle. Your pen name is going to be Frank Yu? Okay. Quite literally, the CRC, continuous reward cycle, influences an athlete's life to the point that the athlete will come to experience practice as her most authentic mode of self-expression. The athlete starts perceiving practice as fundamental to who they are, and the continuous reward cycle as a source of existential meaning. So here we go. This is finally what, the whole damn point. It's that practicing is what their existence is about. The whole sport is, becomes what they are. This is how you become good, is because this is what gives you the feeling of being good, is that you're good at this stuff and you can figure out how to live in this way. So you no longer are a regular human who does stuff. You existentially, are like part and parcel of the sport. Like, that is who you are. And this is why people don't leave, because they don't know anything else. And, that's okay too. The CRC is the way in which the power whose potentiality and actuality are, respectively, talent and practice, manifest itself. Indeed, we can say that an athlete's practice and the subjective experience of her own agency during practice, that is, the power's actuality, is constitutively shaped by the talent, that is, the power's potentiality. Okay, so now we've gone straight metaphysics, and this is the problem here. This is all going to be metaphysics and hand waving. It says the athlete has some innate thing, and that's a power, but then it interacts with the training, which shapes the back and forth, the training to become actual, to show their power. Okay, but again, does this make sense in terms of metaphysics? I don't know. If this is actually how things work, but it does seem to make sense that, look, if you have the talent, that's a power to be shaped. It's by the potentiality, which is the practice. So, yeah, that is the ability to play the sport is the talent. That's your power, is shaped by the practice. Correct. Okay, let me just not say that wrong. Something constitutively shapes something else if the former thing is part of what constitutes the former. Following Calderon, we can explain the idea of constitutive shaping through an example where it is contrasted with a different kind of shaping, which he calls causal. So it's causal shaping. Consider the way that the Nazi air campaign shaped the London skyline. The destructive impact of the bombing caused the London skyline to be shaped a certain way. This contrasts sharply with the way that St. Paul's shapes the London skyline, as Herbert Mason's iconic photograph of December 29, 1940 dramatically demonstrates. St. Paul's defiantly shapes the London skyline by being part of it despite the devastating impact of the bombing campaign. Whereas the Nazi bombing shaped the London skyline in a merely causal sense, St. Paul's constitutively shapes that skyline by being a part or contour of it. Okay, so yeah, there's things that there's a causal notion of making something up, and then there's a constituent thing. And so it's like, why did the window break? Well, there's one thing because glass is fragile from the example before, or it's because I hit it with a baseball bat. And so if you hit something, that's why it broke, but also why it broke is because glass is fragile. So you have to understand there's two ways of what makes something up, of why it is right now the way it is. Okay. So the author suggests that we use the notion of constitutive shaping to capture the relationship between talent and practice with the continuous reward cycle. Therefore, we might say that an athlete's talent constitutively shapes her practice. That is, what makes up the athlete shapes her practice, so that the exceptional athlete and her activity form a distinctive kind of unity. Inside the continuous reward cycle, talent and practice, the athlete and her activity are in a kind of communion. Talent shapes the practice and the athlete's agency, which expresses itself in, just like St. Paul's shapes the London skyline, constitutively by being part of it and forming a unity with it. Yeah, so there's a distinction between what does something is made up by, as opposed to what actually is causing it to be the way it is this second. And so the fact that you've got an athlete has talent, that's what the practice interacts with. They both mutually interact, and then, the person through whatever drives, because we're doing an Aristotelian thing, or maybe you could go Nietzschean, that we've got a drive to overcome. And so the Nietzschean theory would be that the athlete wants to become a better person. This is sort of like the over person, like the Ubermensch, and that's what's driving them to continually change themselves. But that doesn't actually specify what happens, which is the day-to-day workout. But that's interactively determined by their talent and the kind of practice they undergo. Okay, one might think that seeing talent and practice as the same power in potentiality and in actuality, and as combined in the distinctive kind of unity captured by the notion of constitutive shaping, effectively gets rid of the folk distinction of talent and practice presented in section 2. You just love the word Ubermensch. Welcome in, Victor. Sorry, how you doing? Thanks for stopping by. Yeah, I mean, Nietzsche did have a talent for writing. This is not necessarily a straightforward commitment of my view, as we can still maintain those definitions and simply provide a different interpretation of their relationship. So yeah, this author is kind of just calling it all one power. Talent and practice all go together. And so that's how they're getting rid of the circular definition. See, this is why it's a little shaky, because it's just have they defined themselves out of the problem here. I think they might have. And like, does that actually solve anything? No. Defining yourself out of the problem does not solve things. Okay, however, it is not unfair to claim that the author's proposal, and especially the way I've described the continuous reward cycle, blurs the line between the two notions. While a causal shaping relationship between talent and practice, similar to what dispositionalism stated, still allows for talent and practice to exist separately and independently of each other, in the sense of which the Nazi air campaign is independent of the London skyline, the notion of constitutive shaping makes talent and practice two moments in the manifestation of one and the same power. Yeah, so this is a little bit of hand waving. It says, look, you've got talent and you've got practice, but like it's not the same thing. But like it's all part of the power. Like there's two ways of looking at it. That's hand waving right there, but all right. They're saying this is not the most important thing that's going on here. It's that there's a feedback loop is what's more important. And there's also, I think, what Vipers is jumping on. A feedback loop in this sort of stuff is not a new thing at all. Okay, and that's it. We got to the summary here. To summarize, I've argued that talent and practice in the case of exceptional sports champions interact and mutually influence each other. So this is a non-reductive theory, you see. They mutually influence each other in a very distinctive way. So this is just saying, look, they just have this thing that the rest of us don't have. And that the best way to make sense of it is through the notions of actuality, potentiality, and constitutive shaping, as well as through the idea of the continuous reward cycle. These are some key features of the CRC in no particular order. A. Certain natural traits, both physical and psychological, which we may or may not group under the folk notion of talent, constitutively shape the actualization of a power which, once fully actualized, transforms its possessor. B. Talent boosts skill development through practice, sustains motivation, and in some cases, eases the overcoming of early frustration, failure, and disappointment. C. Continuous rewards in the form of positive external feedback and first-person experience of one's improvement in the form of a harmonious fit between her capacities and the activities required by practice. That is what Wynne calls a harmony of capacity. Okay, so this is probably who's Wynne? Who's Wynne? I don't know who this references. Okay, I don't know right there. I mean, it's usually C.T. Wynne, because C.T. Wynne, again, in this area could be, I mean, he's the expert, the leading philosopher of philosophy of games. And so the idea that, like, this person may be referencing T. Wynne is possible. I'm just guessing, though. Actually, you know what? Let's find out. Yeah. Games as agency as art. Again. Yeah. So, that's how it is. So, this is the feedback loop in video games, as we were mentioning before by multiple people said. Okay, provide motivation, thereby helping the athlete to endure better the amount of work required, which, thanks to increased motivation, continues to change over time, not only with respect to quantity, frequency, intensity, etc., but also quality. Yeah, that's the thing. You're going to get feedback that lets you understand how to practice better. You're going to create new practices that are better for you in the way you are. And that's one of the interesting things about this, is that you're going to develop new techniques in practicing, and that's why it's such big a deal that you get like high quality coaches, because they're going to understand all the new practicing techniques. Yeah, I just realized that, Valpo. It's like, yeah, it's like he's getting around. Okay. D. Training and practice, that is, the power in actuality, continues to change and modify its role within the athlete's experience and understanding of her own agency. Qualitatively different kinds of activities are unlocked, pretty much more like more and more challenging levels in a video game. Ha ha ha. As one continues training and ultimately having a transformative effect on the athlete's practical way of being. So yeah, you gain your next level in Pokemon. You're basically a Pokemon, and you train and you level up at a certain point. You also find him a win. Yep. Okay, as a conclusion, let me elaborate a bit further on this last point and on what I mean by transformative. Part of my proposal is also the idea that talent and practice within a cycle of dynamics of the CRC have a transformative effect on the athlete. In the CRC, talent changes the nature of practice practice itself by constitutively shaping it, making it possible for practice to include certain activities and have results that would not be possible otherwise. Talented athletes not only practice in a different way, but their practice also has effects and lends results that are completely out of reach for amateurs. So here, now we're finally getting to the spot saying, look, the rest of you can't do this anymore because this person has changed the way people train their whole life to do things that you couldn't do even with, like, if you could try to get up to some things they do, but because they've been doing things that differently for so long that are geared to them, you're never going to be able to do what they do. So, author says, so while amateurs might have a good grasp on what it is to practice and to get results for them, they are cut off from the practice type and from the results of champions like Cecilia Zandalicini or Michaela Schifrin. In this sense, Olympians are like vampires, which is L.A. Paul's favorite example to illustrate the notion of transformative experience. Quote, imagine that you have a one-time only chance to become a vampire. With one swift, painless bite, you'll be permanently transformed into an elegant and fabulous creature of the night. As a member of the undead, your life will be completely different. How could you possibly make an informed choice? For, after all, you cannot know what it is like to become a vampire until you become one, since the experience of becoming a vampire is transformative. Becoming a sports champion involves a transformative experience resulting in one's apparently identical actions having different effects, unimaginable pre-transformation, and playing different roles in one's practical way of being. Indeed, the actions are only apparently identical. The transformation also makes it the case that the same set of drills executed by me and by Zandalicini play different roles for me and for her, and are expressions of two radically different forms of agency. So, okay. What do you think about this? I think this is okay. Like, this is really not bad. Like, I've actually settled on some ways of reviewing papers. This would get, like, it's got the little existential touch at the end, saying that what you understand by something. It's like when I read some philosophy and when you read philosophy, we're reading something different here. It's like when a sports person practices free throws, and when you practice free throws, it's not the same thing, even though you're both practicing free throws. It's not different. It's not like, do you actually understand what is going through LeBron James's head when he's throwing the ball in, or, Cecilia Zandalicini, or when they, practice? I don't think so. Like, I don't really understand what, like, high-level basketball players is going through their head. I can throw a ball in a hoop. I'm no good at it, but I can do it. But, like, I don't actually understand what they are thinking about and what they are worried about when they are doing these things. It's not so simple just to say, oh, it's the motion of your hand. It's not. Like, his hand is different from my hand. I can only imagine our basketball coach saying, ref, we need a 30-minute timeout so I can explain something really dumb and easy. No. Yeah, you have to understand, not all philosophers suck, Viper. Some of them are okay. And so, like, she might be a good coach. I don't know. It's like, that's the thing. Like, they may not, like, you save the explanations for after the game. But, like, yeah, this was reasonably well argued, I think. I don't quite love the, is this person like a premium metaphysician? Did they come up with some new claim? No. They just went back to some old metaphysics, a powers argument where they got rid of, like, this sort of, like, circularity in the training, and in the talent and practice, and just said it's all one thing. And then once you have the all one thing, it's not metaphysically as confusing, because one thing can, then you have the potential to become a great athlete, but what you do in the combining the training and the practice is how you get there. And if you don't do it, you don't do it, but you had that potential. But, like, okay, is that explaining anything? I don't know. This is not a great, like, this is not breaking any metaphysical ground here, but does it explain something in terms of the differences between the amateur and the professional? Yes. Like, when you go into class, when you are learning something and you ask your teacher a question, they know all the things about your question, and they're trying to break it down in a simplistic way that you can understand it. And you may be like, oh, that makes sense to me. Do you actually understand the things that come out of your professor's mouth when they say something, with your teacher's mouth? You kind of understand it, but you do not understand it in the same way they do. And that's the issue here. Even in sport, this is what's happening. Are these people who are great at sport doing the same thing you are? Well, yeah, I'm throwing the ball in the hoop, but it's not the same. Viper says, to me, it's just copying game design's homework and trying to make it look different, and that she doesn't get caught. I mean, she is, that's fair. I mean, this is the current theory in game design. And do game design know this? Yeah, kind of. But like I was saying, she did the metaphysics. The metaphysics are okay. She didn't fuck them up as far as I could tell. It seemed alright. Like, my complaints about the non-exciting metaphysics aside, like, you don't have to be, this is not an attempt to make fancy metaphysics here. The distinction between constitutive and causal explanation that the author used here is reasonably contemporary. Like, this is, again, not a, this is a fine point. Like, you're not actually going to get the, that distinction in game design. That's out of the philosophy of science. You're gonna have to find that. So the way that the interaction between talent and practice are described here, you're not gonna get in game design. So what you're looking at is like, yeah, you see, like, here's the thing, Vipers. You're seeing what you understand, and that is the overall point. I'm seeing other things in this that are actually reasonably well done. Like the idea that the London skyline example here. I have, yes, I have heard of esports. In fact, have you heard of this website called Twitch? Like, it's very popular in this esport thing. So, it's like, yeah, this is kind of the issue here. It's that, there's a lot more going on here. I think you might not, like, this is directed at other people too. Besides what you're saying, it's like, yes, that's the major, like, that's one of the overarching points, but a lot more is going on. Ivan, welcome in. Thank you for the raid. I appreciate it. What were you up to today? How you doing? Welcome in. Yeah. We were just finishing up a paper on being good at sports, including video games. So yeah, it's like, hey, welcome in, by the way, everyone. Oh, you were doing some philosophy. Nice. Yeah, we're doing some metaphysics here too. We were talking about powers arguments. So like things that are potential that then become actual. Thank you for the follow, Brian. Appreciate it. Yeah, so it's like, how do professional athletes train to become the great athletes that they are? Well, the question is, if you're just saying they've got talent, that doesn't make sense. You say that they practice, that doesn't completely make sense. And just combining them, well, anyone can do that, but what makes them special? And the author here is basically saying you get a feedback loop similar to video games, which I was just arguing with Vipers about, because it's basically the same thing as in video game design, giving you a feedback loop of positive feedback to continue to get you to play the game, to continue to get better at it. And so Vipers is saying, look, there's not a whole lot new here, because the positive feedback loop is well known from, marketing and video game design from time immemorial at this point, many years. I'm saying, look, the structure that the author has given here between training and talent and practice and the training, that actually is something. That's a certain take on how to change people. And like that could also be applied to video games. That would not be given in that in the video game literature. So there's other things going on here, I'm saying. Now, is this breaking any super ground with the feedback loop? No. Is it applying it to maybe a different aspect of human experience? That is what the point is here. And I think that's why this paper is okay. It's applying sort of the known feedback loop in video games and how to develop players in games and game design to this is what's already been going on in training of athletes from a young age. Okay, so maybe this is just treading old ground. I don't know. I'm not an expert in this area. Maybe Vipers is just right. But like, yeah, that's what we've been discussing. So, yeah, let's see. Anything else to say about this? And what were you talking about? The first cause arguments. So like what? Good old Aristotelian stuff too? Yeah, I think this person also has a point in video games. You a lot of times have to learn the mechanics of the video game. In sports, you have to learn the mechanic of the sport. But again, you have to train yourself in a way that you are developing your body for the sport to work specifically for your body. In video games, you're only doing button presses a lot of times or whatever, moving it around. So there's less feedback on how your body is changing when you're talking about video games. So that is a specific difference. Your body's going to change more doing like sports outside than esports. Oh, you're talking about why they're bogus in general, Leibniz in particular with the principle of sufficient reason. Well, there you go. Yeah, I've said I do not like the principle of sufficient reason, but yeah, it's very hard. People have, I think, for a lot of reasons, they really like their principle of sufficient reason. I was asking a logician a while ago why he liked it. He just says, I have to think it. He just says, I have to. He doesn't like the idea of a nonsensical, like, just that you can't find an answer sometimes. He just did not like it. And I said, why? He goes, I have to think with it. I can't do otherwise. And that guy's honest. Like, he's not going to give me some hand-wavy bullshit. He was just saying, I need it. Yeah, that's fair, Vipers. Your mind changes, and you get instant feedback. And that's why people love video games, because it's such a pure thing. With that, like, you immediately go from like the knowing how, knowing like that you're supposed to press these buttons, to knowing how to just do it intuitively, and you get the instant feedback. But the point that this author is making is that your body changes. Like, you are able to jump in ways that people never thought people of your size could jump. Maybe it's like this is doing stuff that like your physically would not be possible, as opposed to like pushing buttons, which people understand you can push buttons. Like, no one thinks that you can't push buttons. Now, maybe when it comes to things like Tetris, people did not realize how fast any human could push buttons. But that's at the extreme end of like speed button pushing, kind of. I mean, that's like that actually is pushing the limits of the controllers. And like they've even developed over the last few years new methods of tapping the controllers, or something called rolling, I believe, where they can tap the bottom of the controller to shake the controller in just the right way, so you don't actually have to do a full button press. But like, that's a different thing. So like, that's interacting with the console in a completely new way, and that would actually be more along the lines of what like the professional sports athletes are doing. They're interacting with their tools in a different way than anyone else had, as opposed to video games where there's button pushes and there's button pushes. It's not that different between who's pushing the button, what it is to push a button. Yeah, but like, you make a good point. Your mind changes, you get the immediate feedback in video games, and in some sense that is like people say that's more of a pure experience, and that's why video games are so fun. You get the feedback, you get to learn, you get to grow immediately, and you don't have to spend the time developing like changes to your body, which may or not be like all that good for you. Wing Sun Kung Fu is fascinating from the perspective of System 1 and System 2. Yeah, so, but that's what they're talking about here. Like, you become able to react in certain ways. Viper says, I don't think there's anything revelatory in saying if you work out, your body changes. No. But if you work out in ways that are new and interesting and change your body in ways people didn't think about, that is something different. Viper says, nor do I see how a few extra metaphors and references add anything to the argument other than more words. Okay, so you're saying that like someone who can jump a little higher than everyone else and is no different than someone who's like a little bit more better at a video game, fine. And argument's been made. I think the person here is saying, look, the way that your body, like everyone's body is a little different, which is not to say everyone's mind is a little different and everyone's hands aren't a little different in playing video games. I'm just saying that there's a bigger difference in bodies between, hands and minds. There's hands, minds, and then bodies in professional sports. And that's part of where the person is saying that more has to go into how you're changing. If you just want to talk about quantity, then it's hands, minds, and bodies for professional athletic sports versus minds and hands for video games. So, yeah. Fine, if that's how you want to break it down, that there's just a numerically higher number of things that change in athletic sports, and that's it then for you. And that may be it, and it may not be significant for you. But I think they're going to say that the agency required might be more significant because it's more of a full body thing. Maybe that doesn't count for you. That's fair. But yeah. Frank says, I think there are non-trivial endurance changes to a pro gamer that should count as body. No, that should completely count. Yeah, that should completely be true. That's fair. But again, it'd be a numerical thing. Like a athlete will have to train just more things in general to do it. I'm not saying esports is in any way easy and that there isn't massive endurance challenges, playing video games all day. I'm here on Twitch. I like watching, streams. I watch people play 8-hour streams of video games, of very difficult video games, which are like the amount of focus and effort taken. Like, I understand it ain't easy. And I'm telling you, I'm going to get off after this paper because last week when I read 2 papers after going for over 2 hours for the first one, I was dead afterwards, and I just can't handle that crap. I am not I probably could read another paper now, but it's probably a bad idea for me to do it. So it's just I know it's not easy, and there's endurance, and how you feel is it's not so simple. I'm just saying there's going to be numerically more for the other sports. Now, again, you don't have to say that just being more is going to be a different in kind. So it may not be any different from esports at that point for you. I'm just saying I think the author here would say that just there is more of it, and that the way you interact with it is going to be different because there's going to be more different ways of doing it. The esports are going to focus on, yes, the endurance, as Frank says, and the mind, hand, and an input device thing. But yeah. So it's but yeah, I guess that would be it then. I think Frank says, I think the body changes more about who you are, and there are more side effects in your regular life. I think that would be the author's position here, and that's why they focused on this, especially because they could have talked, and they obviously do know about video gaming. This person is not ignorant of the video game side of this. As chat looked up, this person has a background in computers in some sense. They referenced games as agency as art, so they've seen the research in this area, or at least some of it, or they've at least hand waved at it. So this is a sort of thing. They hand waved at the LA Paul too, which was, they really basically just threw that in at the end. They should have done a better job. And as Vipers and others have criticized, they should have done a little bit more work here with what is doing the transformation. And so this is actually a good point. This was not enough in terms of the argumentation to make a good argument for transformative experience, and I think Vipers, yeah, they needed to do more work here to impress Vipers more. So I should not be giving the author the pass on this for this area. So that's fair. Yeah, so let's see, what else is there to say about this? Yeah, they should have done a bit more work on the transformative. It was very sad to get to the very end before talking about vampires. Should have been more fun a little bit earlier. But again, as Anne said, they had to put a lot of work into, hand wave and a bunch of other stuff. This is still an academic paper, and they had to, do the little bit of metaphysics on dispositionalism. They had to do the the actuality, potentiality distinction. Then they hand waved it like this experience of harmony, which means nothing. It's just a positive feedback loop. That's all that was. But yeah, you can get that right out of the game design experience, literature, which this author does know about. Okay, any last questions about this? Because I will, like, we should go raid at this point. I don't want to burn my voice out, because if I did anything else, unless anyone else has like a 10-minute suggestion or something, let me know. Otherwise, we can go find someone to raid. Oh, so what did we? So on Friday, our good buddy Aris, who is linked right there, you can give him a shout out. These are the other philosophy streamers. Although I should update that list. Shout out Aristotle. Yeah. So. Frank says, I think there's something missing about people who are good at a thing without being best in the world at a thing. Well, you can be good at something just by naturally thing, but yeah. Is it transformative to become really good at a sport or game even if you're not world champion? It can be, but it'll be not as significant. Like, you wouldn't be sort of one of these people who are basically not like us when we see the like basketball. It's not like what like top level people is. You can be different from yourself, so we can still do this on a smaller scale. And what did Aristotle and I get up to? So I hung out with him on Friday. On Friday, I met up with him at the Museum of Modern Art, and we ran around the museum for a bit. It was me, Aristotle, his old friend from philosophy grad school, and then an old friend of Aris's from his hometown from way back when. And yeah, so we went to the museum. They're like really cool dudes, his friends, really smart, really like good guys. Then we went back to his buddy, his old buddy from grad school lives here now. We went back to his apartment, we hung out. His building had a lounge in it with a pool table, so we played pool. Aris actually fucking beat us. He's better at pool than we are. It's true. And then we went out and got dinner and drinks. And after that, so that was about it. But yeah. How would I distinguish this from armchair psychology? They talked about the metaphysics here of what it is to change as a person. They're not talking about the details of the change. They're talking about like that people do change when they train for sports. So armchair psychology, they're not saying how people change. They're saying basically that people change in a way that's significant enough that they will effectively be different people at the end of their training. Now, yes, is that a little bit of armchair psychology? Would people say I'm the same kid I was a million years ago? I don't know. I think people do change. I agree, but like, yeah, so they did actually reference, like if you come down here at the bottom, if you talk to athletes, this is like, they do actually say like, this is what like top athletes are like, that they are not sort of like on the same level when you talk to them. They're not thinking the same way you are. So is it an empirical claim? Like, is this armchair psychology? Maybe. Yeah, there's probably a little bit, but I think it's not terrible. The Pythagorean influence of pool, like, I don't know, man. Like, he was just, like, we were all like floundering, and he just like would hit in a ball and way more than we did. And says, oh, I want to go to the U.S. for a couple of weeks and visit streamer friends. New York City would be a must. And Canada, so you can hang out with Lumpy, too. Yes, that'd be fun. Well, I mean, and can go to Europe as well. Oh. Yeah, so, so right here, this one right here, it's, she is referencing that it is, you can talk about people and like some of the psychology of it. So they're referencing. Yeah. Well, I'd love to have you, Ann. So, okay. So, yeah, it's a question. How much armchair psychology is in this? This talked about the folk notions of talent and practice. So whatever psychology is built into those, they did reference, but they then shifted to their approach, which is Aristotelian, and so there's no more folk psychology there because Aristotle didn't really. It's just a powers argument that people have the power to change, and so that removed at the end. To answer your question specifically, the author here sort of no longer needed the claim of psychology anymore because they shifted to a metaphysical point of view by the end, because they used Aristotelian, like you have the potential to become something and then you actualize it by practice with training, practice with talent. So okay, so let's see who's still going here. T-Pain is live.